Good morning, everybody, and welcome to all members of FinTech Circle. We're very excited to have you here with us today and welcome you to our membership series, where we introduce you to our key partners, the FinTech Circle partners whom we have handpicked because they provide excellent services and solutions to FinTech startups, FinTech scale-ups. And today I'm very excited to focus on PR, on public relations, on making sure that your brand name gets out there. And we have chosen ClearStory as our partner for the PR. And I'm very happy to introduce you to James McCann. And James is the managing director at ClearStory. And we will talk to him about how to scale up your reputation internationally. And with your reputation, both personally, as CEO of a fintech company, but also as your company grows, to build up your company brand name, to make sure that you are seen by the right journalists, that you are covered, with the right media. So all these questions, which we know are very, very important to you guys to grow your business in a very sustainable way, we will answer today. So with that, I'm very excited to welcome James. James, thank you very much for joining me today.
Very nice to be here, Susanne. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Yes, thank you. And what we will do now, James, I will hand over to you now for your presentation. Afterwards, what we'll do, we take our questions from the audience. So anybody who's got a question, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box on the right side of the screen. And then we will pick it up after James' presentation is finished. We go back and go through all of your questions in detail. So I'm looking forward to them. And I hand over to James now.
Great. Thank you very much, Susanne. And great to meet you, everyone. So I suppose I'll just start off with a brief introduction as to myself and ClearStory. We've about 10 minutes to run through this presentation, so I'll keep it brief, but we're an international PR agency. We're based out of Dublin, Ireland, and we work across North America, Europe, and Southeast Asia mainly. And we generally focus on the
I'm sorry.
Finance in that space. Oh, sorry, Susanne.
Yes, we lost you in the last 10 seconds, James, if you wouldn't mind repeating.
No problem at all. So yeah, just to go back, so we're an international PR agency based out of Dublin, Ireland. We work across North America, Europe, and Southeast Asia. We specialize in early stage technology startups, typically around seed and Series A stage, and obviously fintechs make up part of that mix. We work with the likes of Income Lend in Singapore, LC Light, and a number of others, emerging brands. My own background as founder of ClearStory, so I was a former PR manager for Web Summit. Many of you might be familiar with the technology event in Lisbon, and we had a number of sister events. So I used to manage the PR for Rise in Hong Kong, Surge in Bangalore, and then we also had a few other satellite conferences as well. So that's a bit about myself and ClearStory. So what are we going to cover today? So really this is around how to scale your reputation as an early stage company, and we'll look at the whens and whys of early stage PR, which is always a big question. The key considerations, so before you say a word, before you launch a campaign, what do you need to consider? Content, and what is a compelling narrative, and how to construct one, and journalists, how to liaise with them, how to attract their attention, and crucially, what do they need? Because they are customers too. And then lastly, generating that media attention. What is the 5-point plan that will bring that about? And then obviously Q&A then afterwards. So the when and why of early stage PR, and really the basic answer to that is when needs must act. So perhaps you're looking to raise investment, you're potentially looking for partners or customers. If it's a case where PR can form part of that strategy to enable you to attract those investors, customers, well then you should look at it as a potential option. What are the key issues? Well, the first main obstacle that you're going to come across is the first-time founder conundrum. That's very much centered on the fact that if it is your first time, as a founder or as a company, getting out into the public realm, nobody knows who you are, and that ends up being the biggest obstacle to overcome. So starting earlier means that when it comes to those crucial points in the future, you already have a basis of media coverage and attention, and crucially credibility that you can leverage for a seed or a Series A announcement later down the line. So always look to overcome that first-time founder conundrum early. Credibility, and as we all know, credibility is gold when it comes to growing companies at an early stage, and PR certainly helps with that. It helps with the hiring process, helps with the fundraising process, it helps with the sales process, and we often work with clients in helping shape key elements of their backstories and their company to highlight what makes them credible as a brand, as founders, and so forth and so on. So again, credibility is the key element of PR, and a key reason why to engage in it. And then there's other elements. So obviously you're looking to boost market awareness or brand awareness, so that you can leverage that strategically. Perhaps you're doing something very new in the fintech space that requires a good bit of market education. That's another good reason to start in terms of public relations. And then positioning. So you might be working across multiple sectors. How do you position your brand and what you do to ensure that you've got consistency and consistency of messaging and positioning across those different sectors. So the key considerations, but before you say anything or engage in a campaign, the first is, be very clear on your objectives. What do you want to achieve from a public relations campaign, and what are the central aims around that? Have you reviewed items written about you as founder in the past or the company in the past? These are typically things that can come up in future as part of the campaign, and some of them might be very innocuous, and then some of them might, you might need to prepare some defensive messaging around in some instances, and others, where it's been positive coverage in the past, try and use that strategically to I suppose cut the time it takes to gain that market traction. Maybe get it back up on your website, so that when journalists go to take a look, they can see some of that historic coverage. Have you considered the impact on fundraising or valuations? So we often advise clients before making crucial fundraising announcements. Have you considered, whether there's you might still have VCs, waiting to send you term sheets before you announce, particular close or round or anything along those lines. Just be very clear that you've taken that risk into account. One of the most common errors that we find clients making is that they'll accidentally announce a Series A or a seed round funding before the deals have been signed, and it can put those deals at risk. Have you I suppose accessed the required permissions from partners? So have you, if you're dealing with a particular corporate or a government agency or anything along those lines, before making any announcements around them, have you got their permission to make those announcements? Many early stage companies, they sign a new deal, they feel they can obviously announce it and they want to shout it from the rooftops. It's just always a very good idea to make sure you have those permissions from your partners before you proceed. And then have you prepared clear messaging around the company? So you have your objectives, you have the reason why, you know what you're looking to achieve, but you also need to be very clear on what it is that you want to tell the marketplace, because otherwise your messaging will be sporadic and lacking consistency, and that's particularly important as you go cross country or cross continentally, that there's consistency of that message. So then content. So and obviously content is the currency that you're going to be selling as part of public relations, and it is different obviously to marketing in terms of the content that you're pitching and selling, and most of it is hinged on what we would call your narrative or your backstory, and effectively your narrative is the story that you want to promote. It is about your company, your product, your founder journey, your company history. It contains all of those key messages that you want to communicate. Maybe it's around the size and scale of the company, how quickly you're growing, that you're on a hiring spree, that you've got X, Y, and Z investors on board. But whatever those core messages are, make sure that they're worked into that narrative. the story is really at the early stage what journalists want to hear about. They obviously want to know what inspired you to set up the company, the mission, vision, purpose of the business. Where do you see that disruptive impact coming from? And obviously, big news stories like the closing of those funding announcements always help. To close the gap, but there's also a lot that can be leveraged from your backstories and your motivations. We spoke to a client in the US working in ecosystem development, and he only realized he went into that because his own father was a failed entrepreneur. He didn't get the opportunity that in central Ohio versus the east and west coasts, and his whole motivation, and we came to this on the call, was that if only there was opportunity everywhere when it came to startup building, that his family outcome would have been very different, and that's a key motivation that journalists are very interested in telling that story, because it paints interesting context as to why they're doing it. And the same with fintechs, allowing the unbanked to get access to finance or to credit or to even just bank accounts. These are all things that have a very human element to the story, and you want to make sure that your narrative is connected to that. And I think once you have a lot of that in place, the rest typically follows. In that the background of the team, the details of the product and so forth and so on, all of that then starts to come a little bit more naturally. But these are the elements that journalists tend to pay closer attention to. The other element around narrative creation is to qualify yourself as a business, as a founder. Leverage your background education, leverage your current investors, leverage your month-by-month growth, your year-by-year growth, some of your key partners, whatever it is. Size and scale of the company I have listed here, your biography, your accolades, team, investors, etc. All of these things indicate to journalists that you want to pitch that you're ones to watch, that you are growing rapidly, that you are a company worth doing some more due diligence on and doing a feature piece around, and that's all down to credibility and qualifying your business. Look at those human interest stories. Look at your own journey as a founder. Maybe one of your co-founders as well has an interesting story. The mission, vision, purpose element, the positioning, which has to be almost that umbrella statement in terms of your market positioning. Highlight your USP as part of that. Focus on the product features, but not the mechanics. So obviously tell them what it is that your tool does or the problems that it solves, as opposed to the technology it's built with. And then contextualize yourself in the marketplace and what you do. Always present the big picture and the big impact that you're looking to make. So then journalists are customers too, and what do they need? So I suppose news is obviously something that they're obviously very, very much keen on. So if you have any key announcements, and they can range from the innocuous to like key milestones. Maybe you have 1,000 users or 1,000 customers, and you've raised another 500K or whatever it is, or perhaps you've secured a new partnership, anything along those lines. These are all interesting news announcements that you can leverage. Oftentimes it just involves sitting down and looking at the 6-month timeline of your business, looking at product launches, again, fundraising rounds, any key milestones that you expect to reach, any financial milestones that you expect to reach. All of these are interesting news announcements that you can package and gain some top tier media coverage from. The human interest stories, as I said before, they tend to do quite well. I just have some kind of, I haven't got time to go through some of the case studies, but the founder journey, or what we call the sliding door moments, about maybe one investor turned you down and you got another opportunity elsewhere, or maybe you come from an entrepreneurial family and this is a continuation, or maybe you haven't come from an entrepreneurial family at all. You came from a quite poor background and you hustled to get where you are. These are all stories that you can package and pitch to journalists around your company, provided that you obviously frame it in a very credible way, or frame your company in a credible way. Opinion pieces then as well. So have you got anything contrarian to say about the market at the moment? Is your entire business model focused on the opposite of current industry thinking? Do you see opportunities where others in the market are saying everything is fine and okay? So don't be afraid to, I suppose, pitch those opinion pieces, and you have to write them up and get them published, and get them past the editors. But they're definitely the main focus for thought leadership, and then commentary. So have you any recent events that have taken place in your sector, in your industry, that you want to make comment on? Put together a statement and send it out to a list of targeted journalists who are more than likely going to be writing that story. They might come back to you, get further comment in terms of reaction, and you can leverage that. We call this newsjacking. So those are just some of the tactics that you can employ to give journalists what they want and generate some interesting coverage. And then final point around generating a media interest, a 5-point plan. Set your objectives. Do your research around your target media and your target audience. Plan your campaign. So plan those pitches, plan those press releases. Sit down over the next 6 months and see what you're looking to do. Produce the content, and then appoint somebody to do the outreach, and just keep doing that. Rinse and repeat. Maybe once every 2 weeks, and you'll start to build up a pipeline of interesting opportunities, and start generating some of that media traction. And that's it, Susanne.
Fantastic, James. Excellent. What a great presentation. Super interesting to learn more about how a fintech startup, really can engage successfully with journalists and the media, and also how much work is involved actually at the outset. You just can't just start literally going out without having a plan, because it would backfire. I think that's really, a key lesson to take away, to make it in a very structured approach and properly, because it's worth it. That's what it comes down to. So I've got a couple of questions which I see coming in. So I invite all our members, please send us more of your questions. We will respond to them. The first one was here: can we get a copy of the deck, please? Yes, Darren. A question from Darren Douglas. Darren, we will send it out to all our members, so you will get a copy of the deck from James, 100%. James, do you work with local startup incubators in different countries? Is the second question.
Yeah, we do indeed. We worked with the Zagreb Innovation Center. We work with Hubba in Thailand. We actually work with Techstars, I suppose, in terms of their own ecosystem development program, but we also kind of provide mentorship to some of their startups, say in Japan, for example. So yes, we absolutely do.
Fantastic. Another question: what are the key aspects of a company you can use to highlight credibility?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of key points around that. So first of all, your founding team, I think is the first port of call. Looking at previous career experience, educational background, so previous startups or exits, whichever. In terms of the company, then the financials are one port of call, where if within kind of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you've got 100% growth, 1,000% growth, from like maybe you're turning over 500,000 euros a year, but you've doubled in size each year over the past 3 years. It shows that momentum. Obviously, particular outlets have qualifying conditions as to companies that they talk to, and that's all around size and scale, right? So the likes of Merger Market, wouldn't talk to a company that's turning over less than 10 million, right? But there are other publications that, especially if you're in an emerging technology space where you're building out a market, the likes of facial recognition, or, the likes of, so it's blockchain, actually, fintechs in blockchain right now is very topical. So oftentimes the niche that you're in and explaining what you're doing and how you're doing it can be a core point of credibility. And then, any percentages that you can give around user growth acquisition, again, those finances, the number of partners that you have, and also the listing of your partners. So that's actually one of the protocols we go to as well for clients, which is like, who are your existing partners? And it's like, we work with Amazon, and we work with, Facebook, whatever it is. Those are all key partnerships that we can leverage and we can move forward with. So those are some areas that you can leverage.
Right, James. Lots of our members, looking to raise funding or on the fundraising journey. And so one question from James came in is, how can PR be leveraged to attract investment?
Yeah, sure. And that's a really good question. And that's what we tend to work with most of our clients around, which is building the credibility to the point where, whether you approach an investor or an investor becomes aware of you, that all of that core messaging to establish that credibility, to demonstrate a growth narrative, which is actually the key component that we look to build, that investors, I suppose they consume that content. It means that straight out of the traps, you don't necessarily have to, go through, the initial conversations of who you are, what you're about, and proving the credibility on the call, that it's all present in the public domain, and always link the coverage that you achieve to your Crunchbase, to your angel list listing, to your deal rooms listing, so that when investors are looking, at potential, emerging companies in London or Manchester or whatever it is, they come across you, they can see those articles, and that core credibility that you've built up in those articles, communicating that mission, that vision, the plan, the financials, whatever it is, and that'll help them identify you a lot quicker to make approaches with. And also, as you go through your own journey where you're approaching those investors, you can send them the TechCrunch article, or you can send them the FinTech Times article, and about things they've said about you. So it generally just helps you get past those initial kind of trepidations that investors have and having the conversation with you.
Right. Perfect advice, James. And lots of our members are based in the UK, but they are interested in other markets as well. They want to expand and export across Europe, across the US market, into Asia. And how can they use PR in faraway markets?
Yeah, it's a good question. First of all, build up your base in your domestic market. Take 3 months. Just get yourself featured and profiled. Get your business featured and profiled, and then start looking at external markets. For the reason for that is it's harder to get market traction where you haven't got any localized presence. So if this again is a common challenge for most of our clients. They might be based in Germany looking to launch in the UK or even the US, and they haven't got a team there, and they're trying to build a market presence there. The first thing those journalists will do in those faraway markets is look you up and hit the news section. And if they don't see anything and you've no localization, that's an immediate barrier. So make sure to get those profile pieces and make your intentions clear that you want to launch into Germany, you want to launch into the US or whatever it is, and that at least gives some context to the journalist that okay, this company does exist. They are expanding. They are coming to America, or whatever it is, and then you can start that journey there. The one thing I would say is that it takes time, in the same way as it takes time in your domestic market. It takes time to build up that market presence in the external markets. And what we tend to do is we call it the breadcrumbing effect. We start off in mid-tier publications first in those countries. So business magazines, fintech publications, or blogs, startup publications, whatever it is, so that you're building up a local footprint. And then over time, then as the story gets bigger, you can start attracting, if you're targeting Singapore, the likes of the Straits Times, or if you're targeting the US, maybe the likes of VentureBeat or whatever it is. And again, once you start to get that market traction, you're established, and you can start deploying news strategically then as needed.
Very good advice. So to start with medium outlets, before you go for the top names, to build up your market presence and your market awareness slowly. That's a very good advice. And lots of our startups, want to talk to journalists and want to meet them, but most of them don't know anybody. So how do you start? How to reach out to journalists if it's a cold call, if you don't know them in person? What's the best approach?
Yeah, no, again, a really good question. I mean, the first thing is always do your research. I often kind of follow. I see an awful lot of complaints from journalists on Twitter about the approaches that some startups make and assumptions that they might make about what they can and can't do. So many startups kind of might email say Mike Butcher from TechCrunch and just say, here, we'll pay you €200 to put this article up on your website. Right, that's not how it works. Journalists work off the back of good content, even if it's a case where you don't know them. If you are going to give them a good story that is, again, highlights all those key elements of credibility, you're saving them time, and that's and you're giving them a good story, and that's the currency I'm talking about. So do your research on the journalists, on the publications. Make sure what you are going to approach that journalist or the publication with is relevant to them. It might not be. It could be the case where you make the approach and they haven't got time to publish it, or they have bigger stories that they need to cover. Just keep going back to them with content and say, look, I have another idea about this. Maybe you might explore this story here, or we have this new partnership with X. You might consider that, and you end up building rapport over time because the journalist knows you've taken the time to look at what they do and the publication and the relevance of that. They're going to appreciate the fact that you're coming to them with good content as well, good quality news that they can look at. And if they can't make it work the first time around, or even the second time around, or even the fifth time around, they're going to be coming back to you. And eventually, they're going to say, what, I need to write a story about these guys. We needed to do it for a while, and you get your piece. So consistency and politeness and good content are the keys to building up those relationships. There is that old kind of adage that you need to know a journalist to get a story covered, and it's actually not the case. What you need is a good story and consistency, and you'll get there.
Great, good advice. And also, so consistency, persistency, politeness, and having a good story. That's the key ingredients to get it covered. I've got another question here coming in, which says, at what stage of business or funding should startups engage with a PR agency?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the cost of agencies differ, where you go and kind of what you're looking for. So the first thing I would say is that try and do PR in-house for as long as possible, because you'll be able to educate yourselves as to how it works, and you'll be able to make a more educated decision on the agency to select. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if it's a case where you're faced with a decision, is it like we spend on marketing or PR, make sure that you have a big, a marketing strategy in place, so that you can see how both of those sides of the equation come together as part of a wider strategy. So be very clear on that. The other element is I suppose look at your own team capacity. So is it worth spending, we'll say, 2 or 3 or maybe even €5,000 a month? And I'll get to the pricing in a minute. Is worth spending that, so that it frees up your team to focus on other elements, and you let an agency with good expertise in your sector to do that role, to produce that content, to manage the media relations, and you just do the interviews and convert the content. So it does depend, where's your team at in terms of capacity? Does it make sense to do it from a marketing strategy perspective? And have you got a base of coverage to work off already? If you haven't, it's going to require a lot more effort. You're probably better off outsourcing that effort, because you'll have other things to focus on.
Excellent, James. And you mentioned costs. What are the typical costs for PR agency?
So here's the thing about the PR industry, and I'm always very upfront about it. There's a number of different kind of pricing options. There's I suppose the retainer plus kind of time option, which is what most kind of larger agencies pursue. You pay €2,000-3,000 a month as a retainer. You get a certain amount of activity for that. And then if you go above that per hour basis, you end up being charged more. Problem for early stage startups is that it's not predictable in terms of costs. And it also, like you also need to be careful that you're working with a reputation building agency as an early stage company that's brand building, as opposed to a reputation management agency, which is more at corporate level, because they're two very different challenges. Larger agencies are typically used to working with, your Googles, your Microsofts that are known, and that their news is, anything they do in the marketplace is news. And the traction is far easier to pick up, whereas reputation building is a different discipline. It requires more content focus, more research focus, and more activity focus. You need to push out a lot of content, and the cost can differ then, obviously, quite significantly in that, if you're going with, a larger agency on an international basis, you're hiring multiple teams, you're working with multiple teams, so it can cost up to 10,000-15,000 euros a month on the upper end of the market. The lower end of the market, then you can be working with freelancers. They tend to be more localized, but could be specialized. So you could find a specialized freelancer or small agency, specializing in fintech in the UK, for example. They might only charge, £2,000 or 2,000 euros a month. And then, like where we position ourselves in the marketplace, because we specialize in early stage startups, we do a retainer basis, and that's it. Flat cost, flat fee. We guarantee minimum deliverables, and we offer up to 3 countries, to target per quarter, so that you're building up that international basis. So we're there for scaling companies, and we call that our standard service. And then I suppose on a full service basis, still flat fee, but the cost might differ, and we would charge between 2,000 to 3,000 euros per month, based on the standard service, and then 3,000 maybe to 5,000 a month, on the full service. But that full service is cross-continental campaigns, it's speaking opportunities, it's stakeholder engagement, it's strategic comms, it's all of those kind of higher level services. And we specialize, as I say, in early stage companies, as opposed to just, say, fintechs or just VR. So our network is quite broad. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Fantastic. Very, very good, James. And of course, we should remind all our members they get a discount, on the fees you mentioned of the official rate card, they get a significant discount. So that's, I think, important, for all our members to keep in mind. So if you are interested, in what James has talked about, interested to hire your first PR agency, to hire ClearStory, please either get in touch with James. You can reach out to James on LinkedIn, James McCann. You can email us, at info@fintechcircle.com. We connect you to James. And so please feel free if you want to discuss in more detail. But I think, James, it was excellent to speak to you. Really interesting to learn more about how PR can help scale your reputation internationally, and how well and how structured an approach works. What the things we need to keep in mind. Those 5 steps you talked about was super helpful. And I just got another question finally from Will Hurl. What is the discount for members?
Yeah. So it's 20%. So if it's a case where you're targeting, say 3 markets now, and they're sizable in that, say Germany, UK, and the US, we would typically charge about 2,500 for that. So we'd lock off 500 euros from that. And then if it's a case where it's just a domestic market only, we charge 2,000 euros per month, and we'd obviously discount 20% off the back of that as well.
Yes, so it would be then 1,600 euros converted into pounds. I think I can't do it so quickly, but I think it's less than 1,500 pounds for our pound sterling UK companies. So a very attractive offer. Thank you very much, Will, for your question as well. So thank you very much, James, for your great presentation. Thanks to all our members for joining us today. And we're looking forward to sharing the presentation from James with all of you, so you can review again, get up to speed with the best approach to work with journalists, to work with the media. And you've also the contact details of James on the slides as well, so you can reach out directly to James as well. So thank you very much, James.
Thanks,
and thank
Susanne.
you everybody for joining us today in our webinar. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.